In the midst of London's darkest wartime days, with searchlights sweeping across the skies and the dull thud of bombs occasionally rattling windows, a young woman named Pamela Digby, soon to be known around the globe by her married names, began carving out a life path unlike any other. Though she arrived in the world under the watchful gaze of tradition and aristocratic convention, her journey would ultimately defy every rule that high society had taken for granted. Daring and pragmatic in equal measure, she refused to be a mere bystander in her own story. Instead, she chose to plunge headfirst into a tempest of romance, diplomacy, scandal, and ambition. By the time her life ended, she had transformed herself from a restless, slighted daughter of a noble family into one of the most influential and controversial figures on both sides of the Atlantic. Born into one of England's oldest lineages, Pamela was the daughter of the 11th Baron Digby, a decorated veteran of the First World War who had been awarded the Croix de Guerre by the French. The Digby family had deep roots in Dorset, a county characterized by rolling green fields, peaceful farms, and a long-standing aristocratic heritage. As the oldest child in the family, Pamela should have had access to certain privileges. But under English inheritance law, which generally favored male heirs, she knew from a young age that her younger brother would inherit most of the family's titles and assets. Where did that leave her? For many young women of her status, it was simply accepted that one would marry well, produce children, and maintain a discreet, refined presence in society. Pamela, however, discovered early that she wanted more than that. She detested the rural quiet, the unending monotony of social visits, and the expectation that her life would simply revolve around other people's rules. At first, she didn't fit the typical English rose image. She was described as not being conventionally attractive by the high society standards of the era. Her debut into aristocratic circles did not create the stir she had hoped for. The dresses she wore were deemed plain, and her overall look lacked the fashionable panache that her peers expected. Perhaps as a result, Pamela gravitated toward older companions, worldly men who appreciated her wit, intelligence, and willingness to flatter. Youthful suitors bored her, while the older ones gave her both admiration and financial gifts. It was not lost on her that the men showering her with presents happened to hold significant influence or wealth. She took in their compliments with a sort of calculating gratitude, neither naive nor brazen, just perfectly balanced. It was an early sign that Pamela knew how to maneuver in a society defined by power and money. By the onset of the Second World War, London's shimmering social scene was also transformed. In the months before the Blitz, parties still took place, especially among those who believed the war might be short-lived or were simply determined to enjoy themselves while they still could. Pamela partook in lavish weekends at country estates such as Leeds Castle, hosted by American-born socialites like Lady Olive Bailey, who held gatherings replete with aristocrats, millionaires, and political movers and shakers. Those halcyon days, however, ended once the war effort intensified. With the threat of German bombings, even the wealthiest families tightened their circles and retreated to safer environs when they could. The vibrant pre-war social swirl was replaced by air raid sirens, blackouts, rationing, and a mounting sense of dread. For Pamela, it signaled a new sort of opportunity. She volunteered for work as a translator of French, discovering that her charm and quick wit could thrive even in wartime. It was during this period that she met Randolph Churchill, Winston Churchill's son. He was notorious for his reckless behavior, heavy drinking, and near-compulsive gambling, yet he also carried the Churchill name, arguably the most famous surname in Britain at the time. The real impetus for their meeting, though, was less than romantic. A mutual acquaintance gave Randolph her number, describing Pamela as a fun red-headed tart, the kind of companion who'd help Randolph forget his worries. For Pamela, the lure was partly an escape from countryside boredom and partly the chance to attach herself to the powerful Churchill lineage. Randolph, riddled by fears that he could die in combat, fixated on the idea of marriage as a means to secure his own male heir. It was a strange cocktail of cynicism, attraction, restlessness, and opportunism. Hardly a grand love story, but in October of 1939, they wed, Britain having been at war with Germany for just 2 months. Not long afterward, Pamela gave birth to a son named Winston after his famous grandfather, but life with Randolph proved difficult. He was indeed everything the rumors suggested: a heavy drinker, a gambler, and a womanizer. His endless debts were soon her problem. He demanded that she pay off whatever shortfall he encountered, and, with the marriage strapped for both cash and affection, it quickly slid into misery. By 1945, the union was officially finished. During those war years, however, Pamela gained access to 2 figures whose influence would be profound: Winston Churchill himself, who was leading Britain's fight for survival, and Lord Beaverbrook, the newspaper magnate and government minister known for his extraordinary influence. Both men, far older than Pamela, saw in her a capacity for discreet conversation, a gift for social engagement, and an aptitude for persuasion that went beyond the superficial. That was when she met Averell Harriman, a charismatic American rail magnate and politician who had arrived in London as Franklin Roosevelt's special envoy for Lend-Lease. Harriman was rich, worldly, and confident enough to know how to charm a younger woman. She was instantly drawn to him, and he to her. He was 30 years her senior, but for Pamela his maturity, brilliance, and unstoppable ambition were exactly what she craved. Their affair blossomed. Not only did Harriman shower her with attention and financial support, but he also gave her an outlet for more important ambitions. Through him, she had an ear to the White House. She could pass along her father-in-law's concerns or glean Harriman's insights into Washington's stance on the war, all in the hushed privacy of bedrooms or at private gatherings hidden from prying eyes. In those clandestine conversations, she mastered the art of pillow talk, gleaning bits of intelligence, forging alliances, and staying informed about what men in power were plotting. Though Harriman eventually left London to serve in Russia and was replaced in Pamela's bed by other prominent Americans, most famously the broadcasting legend Edward R. Murrow, the pattern remained constant. Her relationships were never solely about passion. They were also about forging alliances that would benefit her down the line. Her influence sometimes seemed intangible. Simple introductions, quiet advice, or a nod in the right direction, but it gave her status in the eyes of men who hungered for exactly that kind of insider knowledge. No matter what storms battered London, Pamela kept her glittering social life afloat, paying for elegant dinners from money that her lovers provided, always making sure she had enough resources to host the next salon or weekend retreat. When the war finally ended, Pamela found herself in a gray and battered London. The euphoria of victory gave way to the harsh realities of reconstruction. Churchill was voted out of office, and the once ceaselessly admiring public seemed to care less for Winston's clever daughter-in-law, especially with so many actual hardships to address. Pamela was effectively divorced with a young child she alternately doted on and left behind in the care of others. Beaverbrook tried to keep her afloat, giving her a column in the Evening Standard that allowed her to pen gossipy stories about high society. But London was no longer what it had been. The illusions of the pre-war era had vanished. Pamela realized that if she truly wanted to find excitement, wealth, and a vibrant social scene, she had to go somewhere else. She tried New York for a brief time, courtesy of Beaverbrook, but that led to scandal when Harriman's wife in American society circles realized she had crossed the Atlantic to continue her affair. Shaken, she returned to Europe, always chasing a new possibility. Then came Paris. The City of Light in the late 1940s was undergoing a cultural and social renaissance after the trauma of German occupation. For Pamela, it was an irresistible magnet. She latched onto a job from Beaverbrook, who asked her to do some social reporting on people like Stavros Niarchos and Aristotle Onassis, legendary Greek shipping tycoons. It was in Paris that she caught the attention of Prince Ali Khan, the charismatic son of the Aga Khan, one of the wealthiest spiritual leaders in the Muslim world. Ali's passions included horse racing, beautiful art, and even more beautiful women. Their affair was a heady mixture of intense infatuation and opportunistic synergy. She taught him about English society's mores. He introduced her to a cosmopolitan swirl of parties that mixed aristocrats, Hollywood stars, and royalty from Europe and the Middle East. But as all such romances go, Ali Khan eventually moved on. His next conquest was none other than Rita Hayworth, Hollywood's ultimate screen goddess. Pamela, unperturbed, remained open to new prospects. She did not have to wait long before a motor launch arrived one day. At the foot of Ali Khan's villa, and out stepped Gianni Agnelli, the head of the Fiat Empire, reputedly one of the richest men in all Italy. Tall, with a shock of distinctive hair, and possessed of a European elegance that could shift in seconds into the easy charm of a global playboy, Agnelli was, from Pamela's perspective, the golden goose. Their relationship began almost immediately, and she followed him across Europe. St. Moritz, Rome, London, Monte Carlo, wherever Agnelli decided to go, there she was, red hair shining, wardrobe meticulously curated. Pamela's mixture of vivacity and aristocratic courtesy appealed to him. He liked the idea of an English companion who could impress old-money Europeans while also fitting in with the newly emerging post-war elite. For Pamela, Agnelli represented a chance not just at wealth. She'd learned that money could come and go easily, but at a name with enough prestige to keep her secure. She even converted to Catholicism for him and became pregnant, evidently hoping that a child would seal the union. But Agnelli was restless. He did not want to be pinned down, least of all by a woman with Pamela's famously checkered personal history. Instead, he left her to marry the pregnant Morella Caracciolo di Castagneto, a young noblewoman from a devout Catholic family. As a parting gift, he gave Pamela a Bentley, a large apartment, and a very generous sum of cash. Not many women would have been able to withstand such heartbreak, but Pamela had become a master at turning disappointment into a step forward. She soon drifted into the orbit of Baron Ali de Rothschild, a scion of the legendary banking dynasty. This new affair offered her yet another set of experiences. She learned about art, furniture, wine, and European high culture in a way that further polished her well-honed social repertoire. She was also expected to satisfy the Baron's emotional, intellectual, and physical needs. The French press was quickly aware of their relationship, and scandal erupted when his wife discovered what was going on. Rather than hide quietly, the wife vented her fury in dramatic style by ramming her car into Pamela's Bentley. Neither woman was harmed, but the incident only solidified Pamela's reputation for involvement with wealthy, married men. By the time she turned 40, Pamela had spent close to a decade in Paris, sharpened her already formidable social skills, and made sure to keep a wide net of wealthy and influential lovers. Nonetheless, she felt the winds of change. Paris was no longer an endless playground for her. War refugees and exiled princes were returning to their own countries, and new faces from other parts of the world began populating the city's elite gatherings. Sensing that it was time to shape her own future more concretely, she packed her knowledge of high culture and her networks of contacts and followed another promising lead, this time in New York. Among the next big names on Pamela's list was Leland Hayward, a powerful Hollywood agent and producer, best known in some circles for his marriages. He was, at that point, still entangled with his then-wife, the American socialite known as Slim Keith. But Slim and Leland were at a rough patch, and Pamela seemed to swoop in at precisely the right moment. The Churchill name, even if it was only a marriage name from a dissolved union, lent Pamela a certain aura in the United States. For Americans of that generation, Winston Churchill had been not just a British prime minister, but also a symbol of unyielding British resolve during the war. Perhaps that association carried some romantic grandeur, or maybe Leland was simply entranced by her flamboyant social style. Before long, he proposed to her. Pamela gleefully accepted and moved her entire life to New York, sealing the deal in a modest civil ceremony. Suddenly, Pamela was entrenched in an entirely new social scene. The newlyweds purchased an apartment on Fifth Avenue, right across from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Parties became their hallmark, with an ample guest list that included everyone from Henry and Jane Fonda to the Duke and Duchess of Windsor. They created an atmosphere of glamour that enthralled onlookers. Truman Capote, known for his sharp observations and fascination with society's glitterati, found himself pulled in by Pamela's magnetism. Even Babe Paley, an influential socialite who had once shunned Pamela for her perceived betrayal of Slim, began showing up to her gatherings, saying that Leland had landed in a tub of butter by marrying the vivacious Englishwoman, always keen to turn personal success into a profitable venture. Pamela opened a boutique dealing in antiques and reproductions, a field that suited her refined sense of style. The store quickly took off, thanks in part to the loyal patronage of her high society network. But Leland's health began deteriorating, possibly spurred by years of heavy drinking, complicated family tragedies, and the burden of a faltering career. Pamela sold the business in 1967 to dedicate herself to his care. Despite her very public romances, it seemed she had an unexpected capacity for devotion once she was actually married. For 11 years, until 1971, she and Leland navigated a life that was glamorous on the surface. Lavish dinners, famous friends, a prime address in Manhattan but precarious beneath. His death was a jolt to the entire world that revolved around them. At the time of Hayward's passing, Pamela was 51, financially insecure again, and once more on the lookout for her next step. She withdrew from New York momentarily, seeking solace with friends like Frank Sinatra, who, behind the scenes, often provided companionship to people within his wide circle. But Pamela never stayed in one place for long. In August of that year, she cruised the Mediterranean with her friend Gloria Guinness, soaking up the sun and possibly testing the waters for new connections. By the time she returned, she found herself reconnecting with none other than Averell Harriman, whose wife had recently died. Their old flame flared back to life. It was in many ways a perfect alignment of timing. Harriman was not only wealthy, but deeply embedded in the Democratic Party's corridors of power. Pamela, always quick to sense an opportunity, recognized that marrying him would position her at the heart of U.S. politics in a way that might transcend any previous roles she had played. Indeed, 6 months after Leland's death, Pamela married Harriman, moving into his Georgetown home, a stately residence that became known for glamorous parties attended by senators, congressmen, and rising political stars. Here, Pamela launched herself more formally into politics. She arranged fundraisers, orchestrated social events to support Democratic candidates, and applied her trademark charm to strategic aims rather than personal ones. It was in this new role that she began to cement her legacy not as some trifling socialite, but as a formidable force in American public life. Nevertheless, she wasn't without detractors. Truman Capote, once enthralled by her, wrote scathingly in his unfinished novel, Answered Prayers, that she was a woman who had let so many men into her life that she practically resembled a porcupine with spikes inside and out. Many in high society took note, but Pamela brushed off the insults. By then she was too established to be cast aside by mere gossip. Her philanthropic and political activities gave her an air of respectability that her earlier escapades had lacked. If her circle snickered privately at her unapologetic method of acquiring wealthy spouses, they nonetheless lined up at her parties. Eager to sip cocktails next to the politicians and power brokers, she drew to her living room. When Harriman died in 1986, he left her a vast fortune, reportedly upward of $100 million. This allowed her to push even deeper into political waters, focusing her fundraising prowess on the Democratic Party. She donated considerable sums, befriended the young Bill Clinton, and championed moderate liberal causes within the party. For someone who had once been a bored country girl with an uncertain future, it was a remarkable transformation. Decades earlier, she had dazzled men in dinner parties by listening intently to their ambitions. Now she could help shape those ambitions. She knew exactly which strings to pull, which individuals to invite, how to structure gatherings so that not a minute went to waste. Critics might have seen her as manipulative, but those who benefited from her generosity and connections called her a political genius. By the time Bill Clinton rose to the presidency in 1993, Pamela was so deeply woven into the fabric of the Democratic establishment that he offered her one of the country's most significant diplomatic roles, U.S. Ambassador to France. It was an appointment as symbolic as it was functional, linking her personal life story, a woman who had started out in English aristocracy, advanced herself through romantic alliances with American men, made a name for herself in post-war Paris, to a prestigious position in the very country where she had long ago made her second home. In France, she was warmly received by many who remembered her from her youthful exploits, but also by younger politicians and business leaders who recognized that Pamela Harriman embodied a living bridge between the old European aristocracy and the modern American political machine. Fate, however, had one final dramatic twist. In early 1997, while staying at the Ritz in Paris, Pamela suffered a cerebral hemorrhage while swimming in the hotel's pool. She was rushed to medical care, but her condition was dire. By the following day, she was gone. News of her passing spread swiftly, and tributes poured in. The president of France, Jacques Chirac, ordered that the Grand Cross of the Légion d'honneur be placed upon her coffin, making her the first female foreign diplomat to receive that honor. Meanwhile, President Bill Clinton arranged for Air Force One to transport her body back to the United States, and he spoke movingly at her funeral in Washington National Cathedral, praising her for her dedicated service to her adopted country. It was, in some sense, the culmination of a life that had always existed in the interplay between scandal and statesmanship, between personal gain and public service. On one hand, she had a legendary reputation as a courtesan who seduced and collected influential men. The media sometimes reduced her entire biography to a series of salacious anecdotes. On the other hand, she was also a shrewd political operator, a trusted advisor, a woman who advanced the causes of people she cared about, especially if they were in positions of leadership. Her personal diaries might well have contained some of the most fascinating behind-the-scenes accounts of how decisions of global import got made during the 20th century. Yet was it all cunning, or was there also idealism involved? One might argue that Pamela believed her men, Winston Churchill, Averell Harriman, Leland, Hayward, were truly great figures who needed her support just as she needed their protection. She had the ability to charm them, amuse them, and glean their secrets. In return, she was given a stage for her own ambitions. Yes, she thrived on the money, the mansions, the transcontinental yachts, but she also reveled in the knowledge that powerful men listened to her, that she could be the one to whisper in their ear before they made a crucial phone call. When political storms threatened to blow up any of her lovers' careers, she was often the first to sense the danger, and she acted to defend them, or at least to minimize the damage. Not everyone was enthralled, of course. Some of her ex-lovers' wives found her absolutely toxic. She built up a thick skin over years of tabloid stories and whispered rumors. Perhaps she considered jealousy to be a mark of her success. Perhaps her heartbreaks, Agnelli's betrayal, the humiliating closure of the affair with Ali Khan, steeled her. She seemed to live by the credo that the greatest sin was not moral scandal, but irrelevance. So long as she remained visible, so long as the money and invitations continued to flow her way, Pamela found ways to reinvent herself, city by city, man by man, or career pivot by career pivot. From the English countryside to the corridors of power in Washington, from the bunker beneath Winston Churchill's War Office to the palaces of Europe's wealthiest aristocrats, she never stopped recalibrating her identity. Likewise, her philanthropic gestures, though sometimes overshadowed by her romantic dealings, were real. She supported war relief efforts during the Second World War, remained an important hostess for a variety of charities, and advocated for the arts. When she moved into the political realm in the 1970s, she created fundraising events that not only lined campaign coffers, but also brought together talented people from disparate worlds, famous writers, rising politicians, captains of industry, and occasionally old aristocratic friends from her past. Her parties were networking opportunities par excellence, and they made her indispensable to those who sought power or those who hoped to keep it. In that sense, she functioned as a formidable behind-the-scenes power broker. Even her final diplomatic service in France, an official post, one for which she was arguably well prepared by her knowledge of French culture and her years of experience in bridging the social ties between Europe and the United States, might be seen as her ultimate triumph. She went from being a young woman scorned for her plainness and overshadowed by patriarchal inheritance laws to representing one of the world's most powerful nations in a country that had shaped her adult life. And how many women in the mid-20th century, especially those from an aristocratic background, ever reached such a pinnacle? That she did so despite countless public scandals, multiple marriages, and the sneers of critics who dismissed her as a glorified gold digger is a testament to her relentless drive. For some, Pamela's life will forever remain a salacious footnote in the annals of the 20th century, the story of a woman who parlayed her lover's wealth into her own brand of power. Others will prefer to remember her as an extraordinary networker, a figure who made significant contributions to diplomatic relations between the United States and Europe, especially Great Britain, where she was born, and France, where she spent so many formative years. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. She was undoubtedly an opportunist, but also, in many ways, a pioneer for women who refused to be sidelined by archaic social norms. What cannot be denied is her capacity to transform herself. That transformation began in her youth when she recognized that the English countryside and its restrictive laws on inheritance would never grant her the freedom or status she craved. It accelerated during World War II, when she became the confidant of war heroes and world leaders, gleaning from them the secrets of power and forging alliances that would last for decades. Each stage of her life, from the frantic romance with Harriman in bombed-out London, to the star-studded dinners in her Manhattan apartment, to the carefully orchestrated political soirees in Georgetown, was another rung in the ladder. Each ended with heartbreak or tragedy: Randolph's alcoholism, Harriman's refusal to leave his wife for so long, Agnelli's abrupt wedding to another woman, Leland's death. But from each heartbreak, she emerged with more connections, more experience, and a sharper sense of how to navigate the labyrinth of public life. In the final analysis, Pamela Churchill, later Hayward, and finally Harriman, is a figure who challenges simplistic labels. She was neither a helpless victim of patriarchal society nor a saintly champion of humanitarian causes. She had a powerful desire for luxury and security, but also a genuine gift for bridging cultural divides. She appreciated the arts, spoke multiple languages, and understood the complexities of public office enough to hold her own in dialogues with prime ministers, presidents, and ambassadors. She was part courtesan, part confidant, part hostess, part political operative, and it is precisely that convergence of roles that made her impossible to ignore. So, was Pamela the greatest courtesan of the 20th century, as some have alleged, or was she something closer to a maverick politician in an era that afforded few formal pathways for women to wield authority? The question lingers because her life story defies neat categorization. She might well be considered both. She occupied a domain that had historically been out of reach for women who did not fit the mold of a quiet, dutiful wife. She hammered on the gates of high society until they cracked open, slipping through with a cheeky smile and a ready compliment, always prepared to charm the next man who could help her ascend. In doing so, she partially dismantled the illusions that shaped how a woman should climb the social ladder. Rather than abide by the polite constraints that governed aristocratic girls of her generation, she forged her own approach, using the gifts of conversation and magnetism as her currency. Even decades after her death, recollections of Pamela Digby Churchill Hayward Harriman continue to ignite debate. Some revere her as a masterclass in how to reinvent oneself. Others remain appalled by her string of affairs and the intense drama that usually followed in their wake. Whichever viewpoint one takes, it's impossible not to acknowledge that she left her imprint on the 20th century in ways large and small. Whether she was elbow to elbow with Winston Churchill in a secret war bunker, slipping tips to Averell Harriman, or gliding around a Parisian ballroom on the arm of Gianni Agnelli, she never ceased to be relevant. Thus ends the saga of one of the 20th century's most notorious women, a figure who wore multiple identities with ease, who managed to keep learning at every turn, and who left the world stage with a singularly dramatic flourish, receiving honors from presidents and statesmen. Whether one chooses to label her cunning or courageous, manipulative, or simply resourceful, her life story remains one of the most intriguing chapters in modern social history. Some might shake their heads in moral disapproval. Others may feel admiration for her savvy. In both cases, they will have been drawn in by that enthralling mixture of love, war, and the quest for social eminence. Pamela once famously noted that life is like a series of closed doors, but if you have the wit to see the next one that's open, you can keep going indefinitely. She was a living testament to that creed. With each new door she walked through, she discovered not only a different man, but also a broader realm of influence. Perhaps that is her most enduring lesson. This notion that ambition, combined with charm, can transcend the limitations of birth and tradition, forging a path that was entirely her own. She was at times a courtesan, a muse, a hostess, a benefactor, a confidant, and finally an ambassador, recognized by two nations that had long shaped her destiny. And if in the process she scandalized entire circles of aristocrats and social elites, well, that was just part of the show. She never seemed especially apologetic about it, and maybe that was the secret to her success. Unwavering confidence that no matter what might happen, she would find a way forward, spinning the next chapter of her life with the flair and panache of someone who refused to be bound by ordinary rules. Though public memory may never settle on a single verdict of Pamela Churchill Harriman's legacy, the mosaic of her life, from romance to diplomacy, from scandal to statesmanship, cements her as a figure worthy of endless fascination. Through it all, she stood at the nexus of personal desire and political gravity, determined to mold circumstances to her advantage. And in the hushed corners of lavish drawing rooms, or the candlelit privacy of late-night suppers, where power was bartered as readily as money, Pamela cast a singular spell over the people who shaped the 20th century, leaving behind a story that sparkles with audacity, cunning, and an unmistakable sense of destiny.